hit record now. Thanks for joining us. I'm going to share a screen, and just while we're waiting for people to come on board, we want to know a couple of things from you. One was, as we've already said, where are you? The other thing I was interested in is, what's your one bit of wisdom around co-design? And what's the question? What's something you'd like to know today? We may not get to all of that, but it's just good to know that we might want to go to some of those questions. So let me share the screen and I'll put those questions up. And while you're doing that, John and I can introduce ourselves and we can just get rolling. So sharing the screen is always a fraught moment, but I think we should be good. All right, there we are. I think you should presumably now see my slides in presentation mode. Is that right?
Yep, we got them.
Good, excellent. What's going on?
Just disappeared.
Yes, it did disappear, didn't it? That doesn't look like it's going to work very well.
That's okay. That's all right.
So we'll just do this. That's fine if you can see that. So while we're waiting for others to join, while we're introducing ourselves, you might just, there's two more questions there. What one bit of wisdom about co-design have you got? What's your experience? What's one thing that you've learned? You know, just 5 words or less. What's a question? What's an issue you'd like to know about this co-design thing? And if you could pop those into chat, that would be fabulous. And just while you're doing that, some of you we know, some of you work with Twyfords, but we also have a lot of new faces. So it's nice to see some old friends, nice to see some new faces as well. Twyfords, for those of you who don't know, we've been around a long time, decades, done a lot of work in engagement, but we've made a bit of a journey from that community engagement, participation place, more into collaboration, working together on complex problems. That's taken us also from external stakeholders to more and more working internally, and aligned with that is a shift towards more capability. So how do you as an organization understand this different way of working with yourselves and with your stakeholders? So much more a capability building angle these days, supporting organizations to work differently with their stakeholders, internal and external. We wrote a book some years ago, and we've kind of been applying that thinking ever since. That's been our journey. So let me just make sure I'm not missing any participants.
So just a bit about John. I'm a metallurgist by trade. Somebody said I'm an engineer. Somebody once said, no, John, you're a pretend-gineer. You used to be one, but then you saw the light. So worked for BHP for a long time, been with Twyford since 2004. And I guess thing I enjoy, I guess, is just that capability builds, seeing people just drawing some different conclusions about the way to work with people. Yeah. A security panel in Adelaide. Wow, there you go, Marion. That was a long time ago. I do vaguely remember that.
Nice. All right, so let me move on here. I guess just wanted to start off very clearly with kind of the key message from this session and from our thinking. Here's someone else joining us. Is a co-design in our language. So we're drawing this from our own collaborative framework. And when we talk about co-design, we're talking about something that could be a little different to how this terminology is often used. It might be a little different to how you're used to seeing it. So for us, co-design is about co-designing the process. So it's one part of a journey of working with people. I see often out there in the universe, people talk about co-design processes, and I think my sense of that is that often organizations think about that in terms of we are working with people to find solutions that everyone's a part of. That tends to be the language of, or the assumption of the meaning of co-design. We've taken it to a slightly more, we've got a different nuance on that, a different angle on that. So when we talk co-design, we're talking about designing the process. So John, feel free to jump in any time, but I'll just move through these slides. I've got about half a dozen, and then I just want to go to some of your questions and some of the things that are on your mind, folks. So.
Yeah, just on that, I guess co-design for me is the way I think of it is people's fingerprints on what we're doing. So it's about people having a ownership of what we're doing. It's also about obviously finding solutions together. But as Stuart said, we just have used a different terminology. It's the same intent as co-design, the whole process, but fingerprints on the process we've just found has been a really useful part of actually doing stuff better together.
Got one more coming in. So let me just sort of talk to you about how we got there. So if I start up in that top left box, and this was going to be a build, but I'm not on presentation mode, so we've got the full thing. But so let's assume that what we're looking for in our code process is solutions that everyone owns and that they're implementable. So that's what we're trying to achieve here. If we work backwards through this journey, some of you have seen this before. It's clear to us in our experience, and it's probably self-evident, that for solutions to be implementable, people have to participate in their creation. So there's got to be joint creation of those solutions. And just stepping back one further, we have found, I think this has been our experience over the last several years, the last decade or so, that in order to get to that place of solving things together and finding solutions, it's incredibly powerful that people have, as John says, their fingerprints on the process of how we're going to do that. In other words, that co-design piece. So that third step in the top right of the slide, to participate fully in solution finding, people need to own the process, that is, help design the way in which we will work together. How will we go about solving these problems? It's a piece that's often overlooked. I think often we dive in at those last two boxes. We look to work together to find solutions. But that co-design piece is incredibly important. And if we continue to work around that circle clockwise, it's really important if we want people to help us design a process and ultimately design solutions, they've got to understand what the problem is. And so working together to define the problem is a critical part. If we want people, taking another step back, to help us define the dilemma, it's really important that they're feeling heard, acknowledged, respected, that they're genuinely listened to and part of that conversation. And going back to this internal work and organizational capability, the first box in the logic is really, if you're going to do that, then as an organization, you need to be able to commit to that and be able to assure people that we are walking this walk together. We're doing this with, we're not doing this to. So the collaborative process starts in that bottom left and follows the loops round. And as you can see, co-design is a part of that. But it's been our experience that perhaps the most important part of the collaborative process is that building commitment through understanding the dilemma together and co-designing the process. So if we're moving too early to the solve together, find the solution step, it's easy to miss these important parts of the dynamic, which sort of set up the system. And it's why it can be really hard work to solve problems together. That would be our experience. John, have you got anything to add to?
Yeah, I guess just summing it up, it's like it's a decision to do with, it's respecting people in the room, it's actually getting clear, everybody on the same page, it's getting people's fingerprints on it, and then it's finding solutions together, and then you can implement them. So I guess that sort of sums up that logic that we've got. And as Stuart said, we've just found the fingerprints piece is a useful piece. One of the things I say about fingerprints on process, oftentimes it's difficult when people are working together sometimes to give up the control of the content, like the answers. It's actually easier. It's an easier way in, because often we find that people are more willing to, oh, okay, I could accept that they can come in and help us design what we're going to do, but I want to hold a bit tighter to the solution. So sometimes we find that as people let go a little in the process component, how we're going to do this, it's actually a little easier then for them to start to let go of control around the content. It builds some confidence that, yeah, that wasn't too bad, actually letting go of process, and maybe I can let it go a bit on the actual content, and we can find better solutions together.
Yeah, and having those conversations around process and around understanding the problem are the thing that build that continuing commitment to work together on the tough stuff of problem solving, you know, this important part. So the only reason I put a red cross on this is to indicate that in our language, in our map, this is not co-design, this is co-design, but this is, of course, an integral part of the process.
Oh, that bit there, Stuart, where the cross is, we call Cocreate. But I don't want to get into an argument about what terminologies. It's more about the value we see of the fingerprints on process. I wonder, Stuart, I'd just tell a brief story. We did some work on the Queensland plan. So that was a major strategic plan for Queensland. And the government wanted to do it a little differently. They wanted to actually do it with the public as much as they could, given how governments often say they want to do with, but don't necessarily do with. So they wanted to step into a different process. And so we got involved with them and suggested that maybe rather than deciding how you're going to create the plan, why not invite people in to deciding some of the components of that plan? So it's less about the content, what should be in the plan, it's more how we're going to do it. So they said, well, we need to ask some questions of the Queensland community about what they want in this plan. And we said, well, how about we get a group together and let them come up with the questions rather than you deciding the questions. They said, oh, that's interesting, that's a bit different. So they got 400 people up in Mackay in a big room and actually came up with the questions together. I remember the comment was like, wow, we never would have come up with questions like that. So that's a little about co-designing the questions, but it was really about fingerprints on processes as a powerful one. People were able to say, we actually helped create the process that created the plan, not necessarily, and we had a say in the plan, but we certainly saw our fingerprints on the process. So that was a bit of an example of the value and power of that fingerprints on process, or doing the co-design on process.
Yeah. And I just want to move through that. If we go from that sort of logic map that we just saw into the model that we use. So this is our map for collaboration, and as you can see, top right, co-design is an element of that. But the whole thing is about working with our communities of interest to solve complex problems together. And we used to draw this as a sort of linear start with commitment, start with the problem, go through to solution. But we've learned, it's been our practice, it's been our learning, that actually they're all really integral, and you are co-designing all the way through, you're understanding problems all the way through. These are building commitment all the way through. Commitment's core, that's why it's in the center there. You're testing and solving all the way through as well. So it's very much an integrated model. We often talk about start anywhere, go everywhere on this process. But co-design in our language is a piece of it about the fingerprints. Whenever we're problem solving, how do we get their fingerprints on our process, or our collective fingerprints on our collective process? Fingerprints. So why would we do that? There's a bunch of reasons. Here are three fairly clear ones to us that have stood out through the journey. We have found that even where it's controversial, especially where it's controversial, if stakeholders own the process, then they're much more likely to own the outcomes. So if they've bought into how we are arriving at solutions, the solutions are, they're much more likely to be accepting of, supporting of, and have designed the process of creating those solutions. So of course they're more supportive of them. So ownership of process is really important. Fingerprints on the process is huge in terms of trust. We don't trust you. Why would we trust the outcomes? Why would we trust the process? But if I've helped design the process, then of course, it's just like having your hands on the steering wheel. Much easier to feel you trust where the car is going if you're driving. And that the other obvious one is about great ideas about how we're going to do this together. I was running a process some years ago up at Lake Macquarie, north of Sydney. Very controversial, difficult, complex problem about sea level rise, adaptation planning. How are we, a flood-prone community, expected to think about the future and our front yards being under a metre of water? What do we do about that? And now we're flood prone where we weren't flood prone, according to the official classification. Really controversial and really difficult to tackle that. We need a plan, but what does that look like? And we wanted to do this collaboratively, so we got as many people to do it in the room as possible. We were good at designing process, and we got this smart process together, and we got people tackling options and criteria. But I remember this one workshop, and we all just bogged down and got so hard. The work was so complex, the actual content work of separating out different options, and someone in the audience just piped up and said, we need a working group for this. We really need, this is too hard for us. Can we get someone to do this? And it was, oh, okay, well, that's an interesting idea. And it was a bit scary and a bit nerve-wracking, because we said, well, let's put up a flip chart here on the wall and put your names on it if you think you want to be on that group. And I didn't know if we were going to get no people or 100 people, or but we got a good cross-section of people, and that group took this forward. And it's a really small thing, and it feels sort of self-evident and obvious in hindsight, but looking back, that was the time when the community said, the process you are using isn't working. We suggest a different process. Can we do this? And then we said, okay. And our next question was, who's going to do this? You tell us who you want to do this. And they did. And that group worked together. And in this incredibly difficult and contentious setting, that group picked up the ball and they ran with it. And to be honest, they're still running with it about 5 years later. And I look back on that project, and that was the pivotal moment that allowed everything else that followed, because it was the community giving us advice about how the hell we're going to do this. And it was them building the process and them trusting it and them, creating it in their own vision. It really made a huge difference. It was such a small thing, such a powerful thing, and it's really been the key to success there. So that's, it's highly scalable. You can do this like the big Queensland plan thing, get hundreds of people in the room and do a real co-design process, or it can be a really small thing about how am I going to run this meeting.
Yeah, just on the micro level, Stuart, I was just working with a client the other day, and so we were having a discussion, and the conversation revolved around what are we going to do next time with this group. And it's really easy just to design it with your consultant, design it with your colleague. And it's almost self-obvious that you should just say, maybe I should just check in with the group. But it's just not often thought about. And then when you say, why don't you just go and ask those people? Oh, okay. And when they do, they invariably come back and say, geez, that was useful. I got some new ideas. I got some reinforcement. Are they actually, you know, it's that trust piece. You know, it's actually people are seeing their fingerprints on it. So it can really work at the micro level as well as the scalable, as Stuart said.
And it can work even in helping co-design a webinar, which sort of takes me back to the questions, any of the questions you put in. Now, because I'm sharing screens and I've got two screens going, it's a little hard for me to see the chat box, actually. I wonder if, John, if you can see that.
Yeah, haven't got any questions yet.
All right, so
I can see.
Okay, so I'm happy. I would be comfortable just to open that up, given we're a relatively small group, and we can probably let's have a crack at that. And I just wonder if anyone's got any questions or an observation or a tell me more about anything.
Stuart, just that last slide you have. Just want to show that.
Yep, sure.
So it's self-explanatory. I mean, we often find it's about the way you think about it. That, you know, people are important. That involving people in what we're doing is important, and it's less about what you do. It's more about how you think about it. So I think that state of mind piece is always thinking about how do people have their fingerprints on whatever we're doing. Yeah. And it can be little bits, you know, just a thumbprint on the edge, but that makes a difference. So it's all about giving up. So it is a giving up control. And one of the principles we talk about is how do you let go in a collaborative process? So not holding the reins as tight. This is about loosening the reins a bit.
So I'll be interested to hear from anyone if you've got any question, comment, observation, any BFOs, blinding flashes of the obvious in any of that.
Any suggestions for, and I know you don't want to get bogged down in definitions and things, but I was just thinking, you know, when people say co-design, I think they often do mean to collaboratively design the solution. So any suggestions, or maybe that's it, I've just said it, collaboratively design solutions instead of calling it co-design.
Yeah, so your questions about the language or what to call things, yeah. So I guess I would go back to, this is where I go with that, that there is a piece in the framework called where we're co-creating the solutions. And for us, that sort of describes what you've just talked about, is this is the piece where we are working together to solve the problem. But it can't work in isolation. I think that's the key message here. We have found it to be insufficient to go leap into solving problems together with the best will in the world, with the most collaborative intent. That if we dive into solution finding mode, we've probably missed some really key steps. One of which is co-design the process, because this is part of the thing that gives us the power and builds the trust and builds the ownership of everything that comes out of solutions. And even more fundamental, perhaps, is understanding the problem together. So it's a piece. It's just one piece. It's necessary but not sufficient. I think would be my summary of that.
And in the terminology, I mean, I tend to talk about this with people as fingerprints on the process rather than co-design, only because I just think it makes a little more sense to people. It doesn't generate that confusion that often people have. And if you think about that, you can easily think of this whole process as co-design. You know, I can argue that our framework's just co-design, and we could have put fingerprints on process there, co-create solutions. I mean, so I think it's more about just using stuff that works for people. It's really, forget the word, it's more about how do people own the process as much as they own the solutions, and it's a foundational piece that can help build the trust and the confidence that people have to be able to find solutions together. But it's a good question, because I think that's one we find all the time. People get a bit confused by it and say, how would you term it? How's it fit in?
Yeah. Any other questions or comments or observations about that? Any questions about this and how it relates into your world and your work?
I guess it's just for me reiterating what the conversation's already been. Co-design just became the new flavour of the month, and it became a different way of saying collaboration or engagement itself. So we got caught in the loop that everyone was co-designing everything, but actually nothing was. So there became a lot of cynicism about what co-design was or could be, and the people that were trying to do it well, it's like, oh, why are you trying to overcook this? Why are you making it so long? What do you mean we're getting people involved in designing it? No, we need to put a plan together. And so that was kind of the loop that we're in. But there's at least one half decent example, no, actually better than half decent, a good example that we've got here in our human services area, where they're, and I'm just hoping that that's breaking the ground and breaking some of the misconceptions that are out there, so that we can, elsewhere in SA Gov, we can leverage off that where they've done good stuff.
Thanks, Britt.
Yeah, Catherine's comment, there's also tokenism around this too. I mean, yeah, sure. I mean, we often hear that it's like collaboration. People say we're collaborating, and then you ask people and they say, well, we're not really, we're sort of just doing what we normally do. It's certainly a buzzword, any of these buzzwords. Somebody mentioned World Cafe before, you know, it's something we grab hold of and it becomes, we've got to do it. Citizens' juries, I remember. So there's some risk that people do grab hold of the event rather than the mindset, which is that point about it's the state of mind. I think that's important, how you're thinking about this, and then you're more likely to be genuine about the things you need to do to make it really work.
Yes, yes. What you're doing is less important than the thinking. That's been, I think, John, our core learning in doing this work for the last 10 years, hasn't it? It's the state of mind which drives it. So what you call it doesn't matter. It becomes much less tokenistic and much more real if we're thinking like collaborators. And part of the thinking is, I've got something to do with stakeholders today, this week, this month. How can I ensure they've got their fingerprints all over it? You know, that's the mindset question that's driving co-design, which then allows everything else to follow. Anything else, folks, to
a question from me. In South Australia, we have 2 state government employees in the comms and engagement space. We do a program called Better Together, which has principles of engagement that people are meant to have as their key foundational elements of any engagement that they're doing with the community. Twyford staff, the appreciative inquiry staff and the building the bridges are quite foundational in that. So I guess I'm just wondering whether, from your perspective, whether they're still current in the forms that we're using them, whether you've move them on, or they're a bit more mature, because particularly that stakeholder engagement, inquiry and analysis stuff is just so fundamental to what we do here, because people are still stuck in I've done my stakeholder plan, and you just find it's a list of 23 people, no thoughts about interdependencies or key messaging. And
good question. We could probably talk about that a little more, Brett. It'd be good to know just what you've done with that. I think my first response, though, would be, I mean, you just named a good example. If people are sitting down to write the stakeholder list, well, co-design would say, how do we write the list together, wouldn't it? You know, that's the thinking behind co-design is, let's let's together work out the who. Let's build the who together. Let's start with a list and keep building on that, so that we all understand, so that you've got your fingerprints on the who as well as the what. And that's part of the co-design thinking. Might be a way to just add another layer to the process you've just named there.
Catherine, sorry, Nikki, go.
Sorry, I've got a bit of a question or an issue that I'm wondering if Marion, is that how you pronounce your name? Sorry, that you might be able to help with. So I've recently come from the District Health Board, which in New Zealand there are 20 or so of these around the country that are responsible for initiating health portfolios. Anyhow, coming from there, co-design was a relatively easier process to do. And now I've recently gone back to PhD study, and what I'm finding is that I've come across a barrier, which is our ethics committees and them wanting to actually know beforehand what we're going to be doing for a co-design project. And again, my thing is, well, hang on, got to go find out first before I can actually say what I'm doing. So I'm just wondering, putting that that conversation out there, how do we come across those? Because I'm new to research again, and wondering how we mitigate those barriers.
Yeah, I find that quite difficult as well when I've worked with universities. It takes so long to get through the ethics process that if you change something as a result of co-design, or just as a result of things change, you might add months to your process by having to go back through the ethics committees again. So anything that you can do to keep it flexible. It's the same as when you put a budget together. How can you possibly budget for a process that you're co-designing when you have, you really have no idea genuinely how it's going out? If you are genuinely co-designing, you will have, it's like a choose your own adventure. Hey, you've got all sorts of ideas how it could go. John and Stuart, your thoughts?
It just reminded me of something we were going to mention here. Co-design for us is also about the governance of whatever you're doing. It's actually recognising the decision maker's role in this. Picking up on your point about how do you actually allow and build some flexibility into the governance, in this case the ethics committee or their processes, so that they're more aware and more able to deal with the things that emerge. Now, often there's rigour around that that's difficult to do. So I think the co-design piece for us would be drawing those people into that conversation. So it's really clear what the decision-making process is, where the constraints are, and perhaps where the areas of flexibility are that can work for you when you as you build it. And, okay, we've got to go back and revisit it. So it's sort of acknowledging that if it is an emergent process, how do we build as much of that can be in the governance process as well into it? At least making them more aware that you might come back rather, so there's no surprises. So it's not an easy answer, but I think it does give us some clues about what to pay attention to.
Yeah, and it reminds me of the model we often carry in our heads, which is the dial. In some places you can dial the co part up to 10. You've got plenty of room, plenty of space. Other places you've got to dial it right back down for reasons you can't work around. The key thing is to make that visible, to be aware of it, to recognise it, and recognise the implications of that on your collaboration. We really can only go to 2 out of 10 on designing that step. So what does that mean for us? What can we do? How do we talk to people about that? How do we make that part of our process dilemma without necessarily being able to solve it? So you've got to dial as well in all of this. You don't have to be at 11 all the way through.
So picking up on Catherine's point, yes, we will share the links and the overheads if people do have to go.
Yeah,
sorry,
that's
Stuart.
right. I was about to raise that. We've been half an hour and more, conscious people's time, so that's terrific. We'll stay on, and if you want to keep talking, that's fine. The other thing I wanted to say is some of you may be thinking about, well, how does this apply in my situation? Mine's a bit different, or how would I do that? What does that mean? If you want a conversation, we're happy to set aside some time next week to talk. If you get back to us sort of by close of business tomorrow, I'm sure we can find some time to have a a bit more focused conversation if that's what would be helpful. So that's our offer as part of the webinar package, I suppose. Happy to do that. So if you need to go now, by all means, and thank you. And you can expect an email from us shortly with some of this material. Otherwise, happy to stay on for a bit as well if you've got a bit of time or have some other
yeah, well,
questions.
Deb has a question, so some ideas about how to. You might want to talk to that, Deb, just in terms of your question. If Deb's still there.
We're on reference to releasing control. Is that the one?
Yeah.
Working on a project with a number of stakeholders. So trying to co-design engagement implementation plans.
Here she is. Yep. Hi. So not hearing you, Deb. That's it? Yep. No.
So while Deb works on the tech, has anyone else got a question? So Deb's got some issues.
So we can do our best on Deb's question.
So is the challenge, someone needs to drive and move things along, which can be seen as taking control. So it's that tension, isn't it, between making stuff happen, at least that's what I'm reading there, and doing with. So that is a very real tension in many projects that I've seen, absolutely. It's probably one that you can't make go away. I think my advice to people in that situation is make visible that's part of your process dilemma, isn't it? It is actually part of the co-design conversation. It's, folks, I feel we need to move this along, and that's probably going to mean, I feel like it means I've got to pick this up and make stuff happen. Recognize that might be counter to the philosophy that we're buying into here. How does that feel? How does that sound? What can we do about that? Or is that okay? What level of permission can I have just to move things along? Just make that part of the conversation. It's just part of the process dilemma that any project confronts. It's probably never soluble, but it's always something you can keep on the table as part of the conversation. And the more you can be transparent and vulnerable and sharing around those process dilemmas, again, the more trust you build, the more you can step in and support each other. And you'll find, as my group did at Lake Mac, why don't you just do this? Oh, okay, that's what you do. It made such a big difference.
I think often you can be surprised how genuine people are when you ask for help. And it's one of the most difficult things. Every leader has said to me, the most hardest thing I've had to do, John, is to say I don't know the answer. So it's that vulnerability, which is a really important element here, just to be able to say, this is my dilemma. I'm not sure where to go. I think it might cause X, Y, or Z. So just put your thoughts out there and be prepared to be surprised. I rarely find that people take advantage of it. The more genuine you are, they will step into the process. So another experiment you can try. Keep it safe, but go as far as you think you are willing to.
Yes, and I was just picking up there, Deb, on your thing about we're trying to do these as workshop brainstorming sessions. Great. They may not work. It might still feel controlled, but that's okay. If it does, then do something different. It's just a constant. We're trying this. Is this working? Are you getting your fingerprints on this, or are you feel like you're being controlled? Let's try something else. Let's try something else. So it sounds like you're doing actually the right thing. There is probably no answer to that dilemma. There are multiple things to try.
Maria, thanks. So even in government, the word co-design is still managed with caution. I guess that's probably that one about it is of how people have been a bit burned. It's like everybody into co-design. Is that what you're meaning there?
Yes, sorry. Just saying that you know, because sometimes in government things are set. So when you talk about co-designing, sometimes it doesn't really mean co-designing. It's just, you know, more of a, okay, I get you involved from this point onwards, but not from the inception of what you're trying to deliver. Yeah.
That's right. And language matters, doesn't it? So it's important.
It does, yeah.
I think that's one of the reasons why we have found having the map, the framework, helpful, because, well, which bit of this are you talking about? Are you talking about the whole thing, or really just the little green bit there, which is trying to find answers together, you know, or none of the above?
Yeah, I think it's, you know, co-creating the solutions really, because that's what will dictate the whole process. If you start from the beginning, involving people and co-designing with them the solutions, then that will dictates how it will continue. The process will continue until you get to that point, if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah. Good. So anything else, folks? We've got a few stays. Brett, Deb, and Maria still on. Anything else you'd like to share?
And we'll do the we'll send the links and the slides and the offers there for a chat.
Perfect. Thank you so much. It's been really good.
Okay, thanks, Maria.
Yeah, thank you. I've got to head off too, but yeah, it's been great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah,
thanks,
cheers, Brett. And I'm interested if you'd like to have a conversation just about those, the things you've got. It'd be useful to check in on them.
I've sent you an email, and Maria, that was or is still on this call, she's the one that is the lead for the Better Together program now. So it would be good if the three of us looped in together. Yeah, no, that's cool.
Yeah, would love that.
Good. Thanks.
See you then.
Okay.
Perfect. See ya. Thank you.
Thanks.
Good.
Okay. You save that chat.
Save the chat. So
just click on the chat. There's a save chat at the bottom.
Oh yes, save chat. Well, it was different here, but yes, save chat. I haven't done that before.
A little dots
Chat
or something.
Save. Yep.
I'm not sure where it's saved, so you might want to check where it's saved.
But that's good. What I might do also is just see if I can copy.
Copy and paste is what I normally do, just to be on the safe side.
Yeah. Okay.
Because there's some links there people are interested in.
Yeah. Okay. Oh well, what do you think?
Yeah. Look, I think it went well. Yeah.